On Monday, February 10th, the Go Battle League is transitioning from the Great League into the Ultra League. And as you might expect, while we might have some returning highlights, some returning stars such as Swampert and potentially Registeel, there are going to be a lot of new Pokemon that we have not had the opportunity to face in competitive PvP up to this point in Go Battle League. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at some of the expected meta, meaning what Pokemon are we very likely to see a lot of folks running, what Pokemon are predicted to be the strongest in the Ultra League meta. That may or may not be the same thing as the first group. And then finally, what are some potential combinations of Pokemon that might offer some unique synergy to consider as far as some core teams. Let's head into it. Welcome back to the channel, trainers. My name is Oro Chris. I am your catching coach. And as we can see on pvpoke.com's rankings for Ultra League, the tried and true, well, now the meta, the top pick, the Ultra League king, no holds barred, no questions asked, is going to be Giratina. And as you may be aware, there are two forms of Giratina. We have Giratina Altered form, and we have Giratina Origin form. In the Pokemon lore, not super relevant to our PvP dealings, the Origin form is the form that he takes when he's in the, I'm assuming his gender, is the form that Giratina takes when he is in the Distortion dimension. When he comes to our dimension, he can't levitate around and do all the normal things he would in the Distortion dimension, so he takes on the Altered form, where he grows the little caterpillar legs. In either case, in either form, you're only going to be able to use one form of Giratina, or of any Pokemon rather, because of the species rule enacted in the Go Battle League. You're only allowed one of each Pokedex number, and both forms, Altered form and Origin form, have the same Pokedex number. So we're going to have to decide between the two, which are we going to focus on. The difference between these two forms. One, we have to consider what partners are we going to have supporting Giratina, as well as how are we going to handle our counters. Now, with regard to the Giratina Altered form, it doesn't. It's a little bit thicker than the than the Origin form, so it's going to have a little bit better bulk, a little bit better survivability. What that also brings with it, they both have access to Shadow Claw. On either one, on Altered form for sure, you're going to, on Origin form. On Origin form for sure, you're definitely going to want Shadow Ball, or Shadow Claw rather. The alternative fast move for Giratina Origin form is Dragon Tail. And as we can see by the usage statistics here, Shadow Claw just runs the show. It's going to have a much better usage as far as the likelihood for success in the Ultra League meta. And the major reason for that is that Shadow Claw just charges energy so quickly, and with moves like Ominous Wind and Shadow Ball, getting those moves charged up, one, so you can get more shield baits off and go for the go fishing for the potential buff that Ominous Wind could provide. As you may be aware, Ominous Wind is one of those buffing moves, one of the first that we got in the PvP revamp, and with it, it has the potential to both raise the Pokemon's that's using the attacks, both its attack as well as its defense stat. So getting off a couple of those Ominous Wind opportunities is just going to, if you can pull one off, get one attack and defense buff, you're going to be sitting real pretty as far as the rest of that battle goes. Shadow Ball hits like a truck. Great League. The past 2 weeks we've been seeing Haunter running Shadow Ball, just annihilating folks. Shadow Ball here similarly. You could potentially go anti-meta with Dragon Pulse, and the reason that you would select Dragon Pulse in lieu of probably Shadow Ball is that one of the prevalent Pokemon you're going to be seeing as a Giratina counter is going to be Snorlax. Snorlax as a normal type is going to have immunity tier resistance to ghost type moves. So the typical set for Giratina Altered form, not Altered form, I keep saying it, Origin form. the flying one, the scary looking one. Giratina Origin Form's typical set, as we can see, is Shadow Claw, Ominous Wind, and Shadow Ball. Having all ghost type moves, you are going to be completely walled by Snorlax. Now, all things on the table, Snorlax, the typical set, is probably going to be Lick as the fast move, which is going to be a ghost type move hitting Giratina, both altered and origin form, for super effective damage, so watch out for that. But more importantly, it's going to have Body Slam. Now, Body Slam for the ghost types like Giratina are going to be resisting the Body Slam damage. But you could potentially be running an anti-meta set like Outrage as the charge move on Snorlax. So again, there's going to be a lot of variety, a lot of opportunity to theory craft, to select some unique movesets that might help you differentiate yourself in the Ultra League meta. Now, Ominous Wind is going to be a cheaper move energy-wise, so you're going to be able to pull off several Ominous Wind potentially to go for the bait before going for the big KO with Shadow Ball. If you have Dragon Pulse, that's going to at least give you an out, some way to do some damage to something like a Snorlax, as well as to potentially hit some of the other dragons for super effective damage. Giratina as a ghost type is going to be taking super effective damage from the ghost type moves, so having Dragon Pulse isn't going to gain you anything there. It's actually going to lose you something because Shadow Ball hits just so hard, but having that out could be beneficial. The reason you would also, the counter argument back, is one of the common Pokemon we're going to be seeing in the Ultra League meta is Togekiss, and as a fairy type it's going to have immunity to resistance to dragon type attacks like Dragon Pulse. So there's going to be a lot we're going to need to consider when you're crafting your team. If you go full on ghost, we need to have some way with which to address a threat like Snorlax. Similarly, if you go Ominous Wind for the bait and then Dragon Pulse so that you've got something to hit a Snorlax with, what are we going to have as a potential out for better coverage on the back end against Togekiss or other fairies? Granbull, for example, is going to be a Pokemon that, having access to Charm, is going to be just slaying through all of the dragons, including Dragonite recently with the reintroduction of Dragon Breath and Dragon Claw, now also a viable option. Probably if you're going to run a dragon, with Giratina running around, you're probably better off just sticking with Giratina and not going full-on dragon. Registeel here with the steel typing is going to resist fairy type damage from things like Togekiss. With a steel type move like Flash Cannon, it is going to be hitting fairies for super effective. And for the most part, other than potentially fire and water types that don't have a ice subtyping that would negate this, very few things resist steel type damage. So one, it's going to have that out. It's going to be able to hit at a minimum the Giratina tag team for neutral damage with Flash Cannon, but it's also going to have super effective damage versus other Giratina counters like Steelix, Registeel, for example. Registeel, I should say, it has a winning matchup versus Altered Form, and the reason for that is it's resisting all of the charge moves of Altered Form. Dragon being resisted as a steel type, as well as the rock charge move of Ancient Power. But if you've got the straight ghost type set, you're going to have a winning matchup with the Giratina Origin Form versus Registeel. So again, something to consider. Now, as far as the starters go, you're going to see a lot of Venusaur. A lot of folks were big into Community Day, were able to find that Venusaur with Frenzy Plant at a high level. There was a lot of weather boosted days before from the introduction originally of Venusaur up to this point. People saw it coming. A lot of folks have added that and prepared for it. Similarly, Charizard being the fan favorite that it is, you're going to see a lot of, probably even some shiny Charizards running around. So these are both going to be common. The less common starters, I think the preferred set for if you're going to choose a water type attacker as far as the starters go, Swampert's definitely it. Mudshot just charges so quickly. It's just devastating as far as how quickly you can get off those hydro cannons. But more importantly, as a ground type, it's going to have a super effective fast move into things like Registeel, as well as give you a potential nuke option in the back against some steel types like, for example, Registeel, like Melmetal. That having that out if things go south is really just so important. And that brings me to the point of why I really like Altered Form over the Origin Form for Giratina. Having Ancient Power at that rock type attack in the back, or things like an enemy Charizard, where having that double super effective damage, just get that Charizard out of there. You're going to be able to blow through. You're going to demand of your opponent that they give up shields if they want to keep that Pokemon on the battlefield. But it's going to enable you, because Shadow Claw charges so quickly, to work through one or two of those to fish for the Ancient Power buff, and then have energy stored up, or have a basically nearly full health, if not, you know, a half health Giratina done and dealt with a Charizard already. So very strong option as well. Now moving on to Armored Mewtwo. As we said, Venusaur, probably Venusaur is going to be a much more common Pokemon that you're going to be seeing in Ultra League. The reason for that is it's so much less expensive to get a Venusaur up to 2,500 as opposed to some of the other grass alternatives like Meganium. Meganium has an amazing win rate. It's one of the top ranked Pokemon in the Ultra League, but you got to max out the thing in order to get it to its max capacity, because it maxes out well under the 2,500 CP limit for Ultra League. So having Venusaur as an option, if you have Altered Form Giratina with that confusion damage, it's just going to shred, absolutely shred a poison type like Venusaur. As well as with the Rock Slide, very strong, potentially I think the strongest as far as per energy goes, rock type attack as a charge move. So if you've got something like a Togekiss that is giving your Giratina some hassle, getting off a Rock Slide or two is going to just level the playing field and get that Togekiss out of here real quick. So with Rock Slide, Armored Mewtwo is going to have an out against the Flyers, and then Dynamic Punch gives it an out against the other anti-Flyers, things like Steelix, like Registeel. It's got something that's going to be able to hit for super effective damage into them. So a very strong option as far as the anti-meta goes. As you can see, the Armored Mewtwo as a winning matchup against Registeel, as well as Togekiss and Venusaur. Lapras here, the typical set. If you don't have, I know it's going to be pricey either to find a Legacy Lapras with Ice Beam and Ice Shard. Ice Shard is by far the preferred set, and the reason for that being you need to have something that's going to be able to hit super effective into the opponent grass types, things like Venusaur, as well as the opponent dragons and flying types like Togekiss. With just water gun damage, Lapras just falls way behind. It's just not going to be able to keep up with its the reason that it's a premier pick is with Ice Shard, Ice Beam, and Surf. Surf, of course, being a very fast charging and energy efficient move with that stab damage. Stab, of course, being same type attack bonus. It's going to get an added 20% damage buff to Surf, as well as Ice Shard and Ice Beam, because Lapras is a ice water type. Moving on to Alolan Muck. The typical set that is being recommended is Snarl and Dark Pulse, and then adding in Gunk Shot or Sludge Wave. One of those moves being more energy efficient, but not as much of a nuke option. The other one being a little bit quicker charging, but not going to do as much damage. The reason you're going to have an Alolan Muck regardless is because of its dark type. It is going to, as a dark type, resist, as we said, the ghost type moves of both of the Giratina forms. Finally, Armored Mewtwo. Poison typically would be weak to a psychic move like Confusion, but dark types have immunity tier resistance, so that means that they're 2 times resistant to psychic type moves. And then the poison typing just brings back down to 1 times resistant. So we're going to have Muck both being a wall to the ghost types as well as to Armored Mewtwo. It's a very strong position in the Ultra League meta. And as we previously discussed, Snorlax is going to be one of those Pokemon that a lot of people will be running as their Giratina counter. If you've got the standard set of all ghost moves on Giratina Origin form, and even the any of the other sets for the altered form, with that lick damage being super effective into them, as well as Armored Mewtwo, and then having access to so many viable movesets, things like Earthquake, going to be hitting those steel types for super effective damage, things like the dragons with potentially Outrage. You could even go the potentially anti-meta route and have your Snorlax running superpower, so you'd be hitting opponent Snorlax for super effective damage or other normal types. So there's a lot of variety, and what that does is it gives you flexibility on how you want to use that Pokemon, how you want to target it amongst your team. But more importantly, it's going to leave the opponent guessing, is this the Body Slam, which, unless I'm a ghost type, is very few things are going to be resisting. So I'm Body Slam by Snorlax with stab damage is going to be still hitting fairly hard. Do I want to try to shield this, or is it the Outrage that I definitely need to shield? So it plays those mind games and gives you the opportunity to maybe catch your opponent off guard with your moveset until they've had an opportunity to see which one that you've one or both that you've used. And that's part of the challenge, and that's why a Pokemon like this is especially effective in something like Go Battle League. For example, in a match that I had last night, the opponent was running Mew. In blind singles, I have no idea what moveset Mew was running. This one in particular was running Volt Switch, which the standard set on Mew is Shadow Claw. Volt Switch was wrecking my Skarmory. Then he uses a charge move. I don't know if this thing is resisted damage like Psyshock, or if it's going to be super effective. It's Flame Charge. Then I lose the Skarmory matchup, bring in my backup Pokemon, which was a Swampert. He launches another charge move. I'm like, oh, is this another Flame Charge? Is this a bait? Is it a cheap move? It's Grass Knot. So you don't know what Mew is bringing to the table, so you almost are compelled to use a charge move because you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to avoid that, one and done loss. I've gambled. The gamble did not go my way. But here with Snorlax, you're going to be able to play those mind games and potentially have some unique combinations of moves that are going to give it some flavor and surprise factor in a format like blind singles in Go Battle League that really give you some options. Now finally, so we've got the premier picks. These are the cream of the crop meta Pokemon. If you're going to spend the dust, spend the candy, add these to your team, you will not be unhappy with the results. One thing that I will mention with regard to Alolan Muck is that its sole weakness is ground. That is why running a Pokemon like Swampert is going to be very advantageous, to have something that's going to be able to hit Alolan Muck for super effective damage. That's going to be a Pokemon that a lot of folks will be running. So during the editing process, I came to realize that the infographic that I was using on one monitor was not modified during the shooting of that last discussion. So if there's any part where I'm using a cursor to talk about something and the infographic isn't changing, just forgive me. I'm not going to reshoot the whole thing. Back to the video. Moving on to the bargain bin options. These are the Pokemon that are going to have either a shorter buddy distance to accrue the candy, are going to max out above typically the CP threshold for Ultra League, which is 2500, which means you don't have to spend as much dust to get them to the 2500 mark, as well as the option of adding a second move as a baby Pokemon, for example with Togekiss, adding it while the Pokemon is a Togepi. As an aside, I was evolving Lucario when the buddy feature was added to test whether or not you lost your heart progress when you evolve a Pokemon. I had accrued a couple of hearts the first day that it launched with a Riolu, and I'm like, it's a 96%, I'm gonna evolve it for science. And I just evolved the thing to see, are the hearts gone? And then I'm like, oh, I want this for PvP. I didn't add a second move. Well, that's rough. So don't do what Oro Chris did. Learn from his mistakes. But back to the starters, grass type attackers like Venusaur. Venusaur is probably going to be what is much more common. I personally have not seen, if memory serves, in the 200 plus matches of Ultra League that I've participated in, I don't think once I've seen a Meganium. Now that's not to say it's not good. It's very good. It's well ranked. The reason that you don't see it is because it maxes out well below the threshold for Ultra League. And if someone's going to max out a Meganium, that means that they're using it as a grass type attacker. That means that they're choosing it. I want it more than a Venusaur, and I'm willing to spend an extra 200,000 Stardust to get it. That's a big ask for a lot of folks. That's probably the reason that you don't see a lot of Meganium in Ultra League. It's still good, but it's not something that's going to be as common because of the dust cost involved with it. Venusaur and Meganium both have a bad matchup against Giratina. The reason that Venusaur is less preferred in that matchup than Meganium is Meganium at least has some attack that's going to be neutral damage, that being Earthquake. And Earthquake, as we know, even if it's only neutral damage, really hits hard and chunks down the opponent. So in a bad matchup with Venusaur, Giratina can just farm that thing down. It's going to resist the grass type attacks of Venusaur. It's going to resist as a ghost type the poison type attacks of Sludge Bomb. Everything is going to be resisted by a Giratina with regard to Venusaur. So you're going to need to get out of that matchup if you're a Venusaur. Meganium, if you don't want to give up if you don't want to be switch locked, or if you don't want to give up a bad matchup, you can hang in there if you want and at least get some respectable damage with the Earthquake. Now, the alternative to that, or the opposite, is that Togekiss is going to, with its fairy type move, going to be doing neutral damage to a Meganium because it's only a pure grass type. Venusaur, as a grass poison type, is going to be resisting the fairy type damage of Togekiss. Moreover, it is going to have an out as far as super effective damage with that Sludge Bomb. So Meganium has nothing for Togekiss. It's going to be resisted as a flying type. Togekiss is going to resist the grass type attacks of Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant, and it's going to have immunity tier resistance for the Earthquake damage by Meganium. So in that matchup, you're as equally bad off, if not more so, being a Meganium in the Togekiss matchup as Venusaur would be in the Giratina matchup. So pick your poison, decide which one you're going to like to complement your team. Now, if you don't have an answer to steel types, Meganium being able to run that Earthquake and have an out against something like Registeel is going to be able to play mind games and bait some shields that Venusaur is never going to be able to pull off. One, if the opponent doesn't know what's effective or super effective versus what, steel types like Registeel are going to resist the grass types. Most people know that, but they have not just resistance, but immunity tier resistance to poison type attacks. A lot of folks just think that it's even, or that they go with the longer charging move, thinking that it's potentially more damage. But you're going to be better off in a bad matchup where both moves are resisted using Frenzy Plant, because it's just always going to be a more energy efficient move. Now, moving on to the next option, Gyarados with the recently non-legacy Dragon Breath is going to be a really, really great option, both for Ultra League as well as in 2 weeks when we move to Master League. It is going to be one of the top picks, and the reason for that is it's a water flying type, so it's not going to have super effective damage from a dragon type attack, but hitting with Dragon Breath back to the opponent, it's going to be now hitting things like Giratina, Altered Form, Origin Form, Dragonite potentially, Kingdra. All of those are going to be great and prevalent options in the Ultra League, and now we've got Gyarados with the option or the opportunity to hit them for super effective and only taking neutral damage back. Moreover, as a flying type and a water type, as a flying type, it's going to resist the focus blast damage of Registeel. As a water type, it's going to resist the steel type damage of Registeel with regard to Flash Cannon. So it's going to have a awesome, switch in capacity. You're going to use it as a sack swap into a bad Registeel matchup. It's going to be able to take that hit from the opponent. Now, alternatively, all cards on the table, the typical moveset is going to be Dragon Breath and Outrage on Gyarados. If you're running that, Registeel is going to be resisting the Dragon Breath damage, but Lock On is going to be doing virtually no damage. So you're resisting the charge moves. You can at least hit them for neutral damage with something like Crunch. They're resisting your fast move. It's at least a closer matchup, so you've at least got some options. Now, the spicy pick potentially is going with the South American regional exclusive Heracross. Heracross was a top pick in the Ultra League before the buff to close combat, but following the recent buff a month or two back, now with close combat hitting so hard, having that stab damage from a bug fighting type like Heracross, as well as resisting things like grass type attacks from Venusaur and Meganium, as well as resisting things like the ground type attacks of Meganium, of potentially Swampert if you were trying to nuke the opponent at the end. You didn't think you could get to 2 Hydro Cannons, but you wanted to burn all your energy before you go down or something. Moreover, as a with the access to counter, it's going to be hitting things like Registeel, like Snorlax for super effective damage. It's just a really strong anti-meta pick as far as those premier picks go. Snorlax is something you're going to see, as well as if folks are willing to spend the dust, it's a huge investment, but Registeel also is going to be very strong in the Ultra League. Finally, we've got Typhlosion. Now, what's nice about Typhlosion, it's not a winning matchup versus the Giratinas, but it is going to be doing super effective damage with Shadow Claw into the opponent Giratina. They're going to be resisting all of your charge moves, so that's not a positive. But what that does is, let's say that you've got Giratina in the lead position, or your opponent does rather, your Pokemon, you don't want to swap out, it goes down, it's in a losing matchup, it's not getting crushed, but they come out. You now have an opportunity, if the opponent's Giratina is low on health, to come in, get some Shadow Claw damage in, get enough potentially if they're really low on health to knock it out, and now you've farmed up a bunch of energy to now launch something like a Blast Burn or Solar Beam into the opponent's next Pokemon. So definitely some nice options. Now, it is going to, as a fire type, resist the fairy type damage that is very likely to be used by Togekiss, as well as having access to Blast Burn. It is going to be hitting the steel types like Registeel for super effective damage. So if you're considering adding in something like Giratina altered form, that's going to have a bad matchup against something like Registeel. Dragon type attacks and rock type attacks are all going to be resisted. Having something as a secondary alternative in the back like Typhlosion is going to give you an option to hit the steel types for super effective damage, as well as potentially some of the grass type attackers like Venusaur, like Meganium. Those are also going to be very prevalent Pokemon. Ultimately, after looking at the pvpoke.com infographic, it is evident that Giratina is going to be a centralizing force within the Ultra League meta. Every team, virtually every team, is going to have either a Giratina or it's going to be a team crafted to counter the opponent's Giratina. So get used to seeing that Ghost Dragon over the next couple of weeks. If there are any Pokemon that you would like me to test out on the channel, please leave it in a comment down below. I've got about 36 Pokemon prepared for Ultra League at this point. I may already have the Pokemon you're suggesting ready. If not, we can look at some of the suggestions and test something out. We're knocking on rank 10's door at this point, so I'm trying to make it into there before we get too non-traditional or too novel with the teams, but we may try something out. Thanks for watching.